Hello and welcome. I'm Jono Hayes and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Trump issues a warning to Russia, 100% secondary tariffs in 50 days if no Ukraine deal is reached. Plus, a possible breakthrough in Gaza ceasefire talks as President Trump voices hope for a deal within days, but sources accuse Benjamin Netanyahu of stalling the process. And the Iranian president was injured during an Israeli strike last month targeting a secret underground facility in Tehran. US President Donald Trump has just delivered his long-awaited statement on the Ukrainian war during a meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte at the White House. Trump threatened 100% secondary tariffs on Russia if no peace deal is reached within 50 days. He also called it Biden's war, voiced disappointment in Putin, and announced a new weapons deal with Europe footing the bill. Take a listen to what he had to say.
As you know, we've spent $350 billion approximately on this war with Russia and Ukraine, and would like to see it end. It wasn't my war, it was Biden's war. It's not my war. I'm trying to get you out of it. And we want to see it end. And I'm disappointed in President Putin because I thought we would have had a deal 2 months ago, but it doesn't seem to get there. So based on that, we're going to be doing secondary tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. It's very simple. And they'll be at 100%. And we make the best equipment, the best missiles, the best of everything. The European nations know that. And we've made a deal today, and I'm going to have Mark speak about it, but we've made a deal today where we are going to be sending them weapons and they're going to be paying for them.
For more on this, we're joined from Washington by our correspondent, Nick Harper. Nick, thanks for joining us. Now, we know the plan is to send the Patriot system to Ukraine, so similar to what happened in the Biden administration with this. But this time around, Trump is saying the EU is going to pay. So how is it different than the current US policy on aid that is in place to Ukraine?
That's right, John. A little bit different, this. Donald Trump shaking things up. He has long been against this idea of the US itself supplying weapons to Ukraine, constantly coming back to this idea that it is a waste of US taxpayers' money. Now, there is a deal that's still currently in place, agreed by President Biden, where Congress released funds to give Ukraine US-made weapons. But that money, in theory, will run out in the next month or so. So Donald Trump is suggesting a new type of agreement, very much more of a transactional type agreement, in which it will see NATO member countries buying weapons, US-made weapons, and then passing them on to Ukraine, or alternatively passing on their own US-made weapons to Ukraine and then backfilling from the United States. Donald Trump seems to want to do this rather than the US actually paying for and supplying the weapons. And we've already heard from some European countries, including Germany, who's offered to buy 2 Patriot missile defence systems, Norway suggesting that it will buy 1. Donald Trump says that these will arrive within days, but also saying that Ukraine desperately needs these defensive systems in its fight against Moscow.
Nick, we're hearing as well of the sanctions just a few minutes ago being announced as well. What more do we know about these at a very early stage?
Yeah, this was something more of a surprise announcement. That agreement with NATO on the weapons was expected, but this sanction suggestion, very different. Donald Trump suggesting secondary tariffs in 50 days if no ceasefire agreement is reached between Russia and Ukraine. Now, in theory, secondary tariffs means that that would be placed on any country that is doing business with Russia, essentially funding its war machine. So the likes of India, China, Brazil, who are buying cheaper Russian oil and gas, they could potentially see themselves hit with this 100% tariff in 50 days if there is no ceasefire agreement. There is also an alternate plan that's been put forward by Congress, a bipartisan bill agreed by both Republicans and Democrats that could see secondary tariffs of up to 500% placed against those countries. Donald Trump, though, at this stage saying he's going to push ahead with the 100% plan and have that congressional package potentially in the background if he needs it in the future.
And as you mentioned there as well, Nick, 50 days has been the target for when this has to be achieved. But there is strong words from the Trump administration and from President Trump directly towards Putin. It is a shift in tone. What has sparked this?
Yeah, you're right, Jono. We have seen really a disintegration of that relationship between Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump clearly becoming increasingly frustrated that the Russian president is slow walking towards any peace negotiations. During that meeting just a few moments ago, he said that he was very unhappy with Russia, that he was disappointed in Putin. And just on Sunday, he told reporters that Putin talks nice, then bombs everyone in the evening. The bottom line is Donald Trump wants to be the man who's able to bring peace to Europe, the man who's able to agree that ceasefire deal between the two countries. So he's pushing as hard as he can and pushing President Putin to try and achieve that. And I think what we've seen unfold over the course of the last 24 hours is very much the US president's growing anger and frustration that quite simply President Putin does not want to seems to want to make a peace deal.
And throughout the conference as well, we heard a constant reference to Biden's war. What exactly does he mean by Biden's war?
Well, of course, a common refrain from the US president is using really any opportunity to criticize his predecessor. But he did describe this as Biden's war. He said, this is a Biden war. This is a Democrat war. Of course, that completely negates the idea that it was President Putin who decided to invade. I think really that's referring to, again, this idea of President Trump just being unhappy that US dollars have been spent trying to aid Ukraine during this more than 3-year conflict. So trying to put the blame on President Biden and that it's been continuing for a long time without a ceasefire, that the US has spent $350 billion to help Ukraine with arms and humanitarian support, and very much trying to make the breaks, showing that he is now doing a different form of deal, helping Ukraine, but doing so by getting Europe to pay for it.
Constantly evolving at the moment. But Nick Harper, live in Washington, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to stay on this story, and let's go now to John Kavulich, who is our senior editor for outcome modelling analysis at Issue Insight, joining us live from London. First off, John, are you surprised with Trump's remarks? The announcement of the 100% tariffs, which, as we just heard there, was somewhat of a surprise. Do you think he'll actually follow through on this?
Two important questions. With President Trump, everyone's always surprised. Even when we read in advance what he's supposed to say, we're still surprised. So, 500% tariffs in the Senate bill, his 100% tariffs, because he said, once you get above 100%, does it really matter? So he's being practical. Will it happen? Well, if you count the 50 days, it looks like it's right around September the 2nd, which would be for me an early birthday present, but it also comes right around our Labor Day holiday. So, and then gearing up about 2 weeks into the UN General Assembly, which would give President Trump an ability to tout during his speech that, hey, I finally resolved this temporarily with a ceasefire, but we'll see.
John, saying that it's, and you said 100%, 500%, whatever the tariff manages to be, is any of that really going to make a difference to Russia? Is that really going to make a difference and bring Putin to the table for negotiations? Or is it just kind of symbolic?
It potentially is real. India is a huge purchaser of oil because it's able to buy it at a discount, and it's got 1 billion plus people. So for India, it's useful, and they do refine some and send it on. And China's another big purchaser of Russian oil. Is either India or China, do they have the elasticity, the economic, political, commercial, financial elasticity to absorb those tariffs? Potentially you could see Russia discounting the oil to the point where the tariff doesn't matter. But 100% secondary tariffs get attention, and primarily they get attention because that means that banks start looking to their compliance officers. The compliance officers start reading the U.S. regulations, and then people start to get nervous because then you start to worry about fines. So yes, they potentially can be a deterrent, but as we've seen with President Trump, he generally doesn't like to drop the hammer, so to speak. He likes to threat, and keep threatening and keep delaying, hoping he can get a deal. So, if we look at his history, it's likely they're not going to actually implement anything.
Well, something that is being implemented, and we know that is definitely going to happen, is that NATO and the deal that's been struck there indicates that they will be paying for these weapon defense systems. Was that inevitable? Do you think that that was going to happen regardless?
Yes, there was no question that President Trump was not going to use U.S. taxpayer money when he now sees a great big pot of money within the European Union members, the 27 members of the EU, and the 32 members of NATO. EU has they've just about agreed to this $150 billion pot of defense authorizations, money that can be spent, and Canada's trying to get involved, Turkey is trying to get involved so they can all get a piece of this. Well, now that money's sitting there, and so for President Trump, he knows that most of the NATO members continue to get their military hardware from the US. So for him, it's sort of it's free money lying there. But the challenge is going to be, and we saw this at the NATO meeting a week ago with the president, Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain, where he said, okay, two things. First, I've got Patriots, but I really don't want to give it away because President Zelensky has spent 4 years telling us that we should be scared of Russia, even though Spain is quite a way away from Russia. And then number two, if I adhere to this 5%, 3.5% of defense and 1.5% infrastructure, if I move our resources, I'm going to get thrown out of office because our voters won't like it. So there's a lot that's continuing to unravel here. But for President Trump, it's a good day. He's a salesman and he's selling what he wants to sell, but Ukraine isn't going to get all this stuff right away because these Patriot batteries, they take about a year to make. You're talking about 600 a year or so. So, this is going to be somewhat of a slow process. I would just add finally that what was interesting in what President Trump said today, he alluded to the fact that President Putin was an assassin, which was sort of interesting play on words. And the other is that he said, I wrote this down. He fooled many people. He fooled Bush, he fooled Obama, and he fooled Biden. He didn't say the word lie. Mm-hmm. And he didn't say Putin lied to him. And so that's really interesting. He continues to avoid saying that Putin lied to him and Putin said no to him. So it's always very, very interesting to watch the linguistics that President Trump uses.
John, before we let you go, the US envoy as well, Keith Kellogg, is in Kyiv for defense talks with senior Ukrainian officials. Probably no coincidence at such a time when Trump makes this announcement, but that is his first visit since there's been any previous announcement on military aid. So what does his presence there actually tell us about the direction that the administration is taking on Ukraine?
Well, General Kellogg, he's a retired, lieutenant general, and the perception was, hey, there's this 80-year-old guy, and who's going to pay attention to him? But he's sort of like Yoda, in the Star Wars, that President Trump, he likes people that have experience. And so he's not flashy, but he's common sense. The Ukrainians also initially sort of pushed him aside, saying, what's this guy? He's not J.D. Vance, he's not Rubio, he's not President Trump. So we're just going to we're going to mock him. We're not really going to deal with him. And eventually they got the message. And so it's good he's there. His daughter is also very heavily involved in Ukraine. And so that gives him a connectivity that others don't have. But the timing, wasn't a coincidence. He was planned to go as a part of this sort of rollout. And, hopefully the Ukrainians will embrace this visit. They're not going to get everything they want. They never get everything they want because they want everything. But this is a good day for them, and hopefully they'll embrace it.
John Kavulich, thank you so much for joining us live from London. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
US President Donald Trump has expressed hope that a breakthrough could come soon in the stalled Gaza ceasefire and hostage negotiations. However, sources say Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is deliberately delaying progress to keep political pressure off himself. Netanyahu insists the war must continue until Hamas is fully disarmed and all hostages are returned. Meanwhile, the US envoy, Steve Witkoff, remains optimistic as talks continue behind the scenes. Now, for more on this, we're joined from Tel Aviv by our correspondent, Blake Sifton. Blake, first of all, thank you for joining us. Trump has said he's very hopeful that a Gaza ceasefire breakthrough will come this week. Is there any real indication in Israel that that is really on the cards? Is this political optimism once again?
These comments by President Trump that a deal may be incoming soon do appear to be overly optimistic. They do not appear to be met by facts on the ground, certainly what's being reported from the negotiations. The negotiations essentially hinge on 4 points, 4 issues. The first of which is the distribution of aid into Gaza, how much aid will increase under a ceasefire, and who will distribute it. Another key point is Hamas's demand for a guarantee that during this ceasefire, the 60-day truce, as long as negotiations toward a permanent ceasefire are still ongoing, Israel will not resume its attacks as it did during the previous ceasefire in March. A third point is on the Palestinian prisoners who will be released in exchange for Israeli hostages, including how many and who they will be. And the fourth and most difficult issue is the redeployment of Israeli forces during this ceasefire. Israel has insisted that its forces will stay in what's called the Moreg corridor. That's a narrow strip of land in southern Gaza between Khan Yunis and Rafah that it established after the last ceasefire broke down and hostilities renewed, and where it plans to build what's being called a humanitarian city, roughly around the area of Rafah, where, according to the plan, the entire population of Gaza will be pushed into. These suggestions that they'll remain in the Moreg corridor and that they'll establish this humanitarian city are viewed as complete non-starters by Hamas. And while Israel is reported to have shown some flexibility and provided new maps to negotiators showing where their forces may redeploy, the two sides are viewed as being very, very far apart on this issue.
Now, Blake, we know that Steve Witkoff, President Trump's Middle East envoy, he said on Sunday that he is very hopeful about a Gaza ceasefire deal. He's also planned to meet senior Qatari officials during the Club World Cup that's taking place. But how significant is his role in these talks, from Israel's perspective at least? Is there any indication that this diplomatic track could actually break the deadlock that we've seen in the recent days and weeks?
During a period of even greater optimism on the likelihood of success in the negotiations last week, the White House had said that Witkoff was on his way, that he would be going soon to Doha to join the talks. Of course, that didn't happen, and his visit was pushed off when those talks faltered. His presence at the talks would be viewed as a barometer of the likelihood of them succeeding. So if he did arrive, that would be a sign that the talks are progressing. In addition to his presence, it should be noted that key members of the Israeli negotiating team have also not traveled to Qatar for this round of talks, including the head of Shin Bet and the Mossad. There have been allegations that the Israeli negotiators present are not empowered with the ability to make meaningful decisions at this stage. When it comes to the possibility of a diplomatic pressure leading to a breakthrough, the Qataris are viewed as having quite a bit of input and sway over Hamas. And of course, Witkoff meeting with them could lead them to passing on pressure essentially on Hamas. However, when it comes to the presence of Israeli forces in the Moreg corridor, and especially the suggestion that they will be creating this humanitarian city, it's unlikely that that any pressure would be able to change Hamas's mind on this point.
Well, as you say, Hamas have said it's an outright no from them for this humanitarian city in Rafah. But what is the reaction in Israel? What's the reaction there on the ground from people? Is this actually seen as a viable solution?
So this suggestion of establishing this humanitarian city, it's been called for by the far right. It's been openly espoused and advocated by the defense minister, Katz. However, it has been met with condemnation, certainly internationally, and also within some quarters in Israel. It would essentially see, at first, hundreds of thousands, some 600,000 Palestinians from the central area, from the Nuseirat area, El Mawasi area in Gaza, be pushed to the south. And then, in theory, according to this plan, the entire population of Gaza, over 2 million people, would eventually be pushed to this very, very small area in the south of Gaza. Of course, Gaza itself is a very small area to begin with. And crucially, once they are there, according to this plan, Palestinians in this area would not be allowed to leave other than to go to other countries. So humanitarian organizations, international lawyers, international governments have, of course, condemned this plan. Within Israel, opposition leader Yair Lapid has called it crazy. He has said that it basically thwarts the likelihood of any negotiations being successful, and has said that it is essentially Netanyahu pandering to the far right. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert went a step further. He said this idea, the suggestion of forcibly displacing the population of Gaza amounts to ethnic cleansing, and if established, this humanitarian city would be a concentration camp. So very strong words from a former Israeli leader there. The Israeli military has reportedly told the government that establishing this city would take over a year and cost billions. And according to reports, Netanyahu reacted angrily to that, asking that it be made possible much more quickly and much more cheaply.
Blake, before we let you go, we're seeing reports today that maritime agencies have officially ended their search for any remaining crew of the Eternity Sea. That is the cargo ship that was attacked by Yemen's Houthi rebels last week before sinking. Now, 15 people are still missing from that incident. What has the reaction been like in Israel? Because this has been said, the Houthis said that these attacks are actually in support of Palestinians in Gaza.
The attacks on shipping in the Red Sea are certainly being watched closely here in Israel. However, when it comes to the Houthis, what's much more of a concern to both the people here and the government are the ongoing ballistic missile and drone attacks that the Houthis are carrying out against Israel. They remain, outside of Gaza and the West Bank, the only force that is currently engaging Israel, that is currently fighting, trying to fight Israeli forces. Of course, with ceasefires in place in Lebanon and with Iran. They, in the past, have halted their attacks during the two previous ceasefires in Gaza. So they've said that if there is an additional ceasefire, a new ceasefire, they will once again halt attacks. And it should be noted, of course, that over the last several months, the Israeli military has been carrying out punishing attacks against Houthi targets in Yemen, the port of Hodeidah, the airport, critical infrastructure. And despite those overwhelming attacks, they haven't led to an end in Houthi attacks on Israel. So, as you say, attacks on maritime targets, as well as ballistic missile and drone attacks, are likely to continue until there is a meaningful ceasefire in place in Gaza.
Blake Sifton, thank you so much for joining us from Tel Aviv. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Syria has deployed security forces after more than 30 people were killed in clashes between Sunni Bedouin tribal fighters and Druze militia in southern Syria. The violence erupted after a wave of kidnappings, including the abduction of a merchant on the highway linking Damascus to Sweden. The Syrian Ministry of Interior said they will begin intervention to de-escalate tensions between the fighters. The Freedom Flotilla ship called Handala, that's carrying pro-Palestinian activists and humanitarian aid, has left Sicily in an effort to break the blockade on Gaza. The Handala sails just weeks after another Freedom Flotilla boat was seized by Israel. The vessel will sail for about a week in the Mediterranean in the hopes of reaching Gaza's coast. A BBC documentary about Gaza breached editorial guidelines on accuracy by failing to disclose the narrator was the son of a Hamas official. So an internal review has found that no evidence that outside interests inappropriately impacted the programme. The documentary, Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, narrated by a 13-year-old, was pulled from streaming platforms in February of this year. Buckingham Palace will host US President Donald Trump in September. The 3-day state visit is scheduled during the UK Parliament's recess. Last week, Labour MPs signed a motion blocking Trump from giving a speech during the state visit. The Stop Trump coalition says they plan to disrupt the visit by holding one of the biggest anti-Trump protests in London. South Korea is deciding whether to accept the US demands for it to reduce barriers to agricultural imports. It's part of its efforts to lower the Trump administration's proposed 25% tariffs on goods from the country. One of Washington's key requests is to ease restrictions on the import of US beef that is over 30 months old. But it's raising concerns amongst cattle industry players and consumers likewise. In South Korea, Patrick Falk reports.
In barbecue-loving South Korea, sizzling beef is a staple for many people. Despite thriving domestic production, the country still relies on a significant amount that's imported. It's the world's biggest buyer of beef from the US. Park Jae-hong is head of South Korea's largest wholesale beef market. He says South Korean cuts aren't the same as what's shipped from America.
This side is Korean beef, and this side is imported beef. At first glance, they may look the same, but the taste is dramatically different.
Many people in South Korea believe locally produced beef is superior. Beef imported from the US is more affordable and is often used for marinated dishes, according to some, to mask the flavor. American beef is already set to become more common here thanks to a free trade agreement that will bring tariffs on imports to zero next year. But Washington is urging Seoul to go a step further and to remove an existing block on shipments of beef from cattle that's over 30 months old. Moon Bu-ki is a butcher and specializes in Korean beef. Like many in his line of business, he's concerned about potential upheaval. He says easing controls on US imported beef would push prices down and pressure local vendors. The current restrictions are in place over fears of bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or mad cow disease. That's despite the World Health Organization classifying the US as a negligible risk for it. But it's consumers in South Korea that need convincing.
If Trump demands Korea imports beef that's over 30 months old, the cattle people fear may carry mad cow disease. I'm not sure if we can resist as firmly as we did in the past. But if it happens, I will do my research as a consumer. I'll scrutinize the information closely. If it's scientifically proven safe, I might decide to buy it and eat it.
In 2008, tens of thousands of people protested over the lifting of an import ban on American beef. It remains a sensitive issue in the country. Washington says the current restrictions are unfair. But experts like Kim Song-hun, who's a professor of agricultural economics at Chungnam National University, says its push now to lift limits on beef that's currently banned is a risky move. Consumer anxiety over US beef may increase, he says, and shoppers may avoid it in supermarkets because of safety fears. But the government is signaling it may be willing to budge and address so-called non-tariff barriers to the market. Policymakers say strategic decisions are needed for a broad trade agreement. Patrick Falk, Al Arabiya.
Let's take a look at the top business news. Bitcoin has set a historic record by surpassing $120,000. This comes as US Congress votes on 3 bills that could transform global digital asset regulation. Meanwhile, the co-founder of the cryptocurrency Tornado Cash, Roman Storm, goes on trial today in New York on charges of money laundering for more than $1 billion. The trial is continuing even though Trump had lifted sanctions on Tornado Cash. This week, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg is expected to face investors over alleged privacy violations that cost the company billions of dollars. Zuckerberg is accused of operating Facebook as an illegal enterprise that allowed users to have their data harvested without their consent. Investors want Zuckerberg to pay back more than $8 billion that was spent on fines. Turning to sport, and Arsenal have agreed to a multi-million-dollar deal with Valencia defender Christian Mosquera. The 21-year-old is expected to undergo medical tests this week, while final details on a £13 million fee with added bonuses is being discussed. Mosquera is one of Europe's most highly rated young centre-backs. And finally, US President Donald Trump has made a special appearance at Chelsea's World Cup celebrations yesterday. The crowd booed Trump during the national anthem, before the match, and then later while walking out with FIFA President Gianni Infantino to present the trophy. The US, along with Canada and Mexico, will jointly host the 2026 Men's World Cup next summer. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian was reportedly injured during one of Israel's strikes last month on a secret underground facility in Tehran. The attack, which occurred on June 16th, is said to have trapped top Iranian officials inside the complex by blocking all the entry and exit points. Pezeshkian reportedly escaped through an emergency shaft with minor leg injuries. Now, to discuss this more, we're joined from London by political analyst Babak Emamian, who is with us live. First of all, if the FAR's report is accurate and Israel nearly took out the president and the top leadership as well, what does that really say about the vulnerability of Iran's most secure military infrastructure?
Well, we must appreciate that Iran regime has been threatening the Israelis for the last 46 years now, in its 47th year. And the Israelis have been infiltrating the whole Iranian regime system for the last 46 years. They haven't been sitting idle doing nothing, but they've been working on this. And this is normal. Even if you take the B-2 bombers, US, it took 20 years of preparation. So this idea of infiltrating Iranian system happened like last couple of years. No, it's been happening for the last 46 years. So, and Israelis are very good at it.
Now, it has been touted that it's likely Israel had some help on the inside, that they had access to real-time data and intelligence on the whereabouts of these top Iranian leaders. So we're looking at some deep infiltration here. Is that legitimate? Is that a real cause for concern?
Well, there have been some reports out, and they, on purposely, these reports have been out, that a lot of people who've been cooperating with the Israelis were volunteers. And Israelis have actually said that majority of attacks were from inside Iran. And also they've mentioned that these people were mostly volunteers helping them. And also they've mentioned that the cost of operation inside Iran has been very little. It's not been much.
If it's true, so if there is an infiltration, given the scale of this security breach that we may have seen, is it possible to say that Tehran may have lost its grip on the internal control, especially within the IRGC?
Well, we see it every day. First of all, there is this philosophy that a weak Iran reduces tension in the region. So it's a good thing. So everybody, whether Iranians inside Iran or people outside of Iran, want a weak regime. And right now, the idea of regime change is not on the cards, because the way we see it is that the Iranian people have been exhausted emotionally and financially for the last 46 years. They know how to hate the regime, but they don't know how to release themselves. So their policy now is to make the Iran regime as weak as possible. That's why we see targeted attacks every day. And these targeted attacks could not have happened without cooperation from Iranians within Iran.
Babak, President Pezeshkian is still relatively new in office. He's been there since 30th of July 2024, so it's just over a year. An incident like this, is it likely to weaken his standing with the Revolutionary Guard, or does it actually rally some support? Does it see him as a survivor, somewhat of a martyr?
Well, during the last year election, according to the regime, something nearly 40% turned up. Usually, whatever the regime says, if it is good news, you have to divide it by 2. If it is bad news, you have to multiply it by 2. So if they say 40%, I can assure you only 20% turned up. And out of the 20%, only 10% voted for him. So this idea that this is a popular president, and morally, he is not a capable man either. He's not a natural leader. He hasn't done much anyway. He's been subordinate to the supreme leader. So it doesn't make any difference. He's not here or nor there. He's nobody.
So you think he's not a key player, he's not enough of a key player for this to really make any difference to people on the ground, and you really don't think that it's going to make any difference to Iranians on the ground? They don't mind, they don't care about this?
Well, the policy of Iran regime has been to have no peace, no war, keep it at that stage, and have a form of diplomatic relationship. So keep it at no peace, no war. Now we've gone from that phase to war. We are at war phase. And they have no plan for war phase. And they have no plan for peace either. So whoever is in charge has no plan either for peace or war. And right now, they want to revert it back to diplomatic phase. But it's not possible. Once you go into the war phase, it is very difficult to revert it back into diplomatic phase, as we see in Ukraine war.
Babak, I guess, as you say, no war, but also no peace. But we have seen deterrence, I think, has been the key message that we've seen from Iran through the last couple of weeks and months. Is that likely to become more aggressive now? Do you think that they may be more retaliation back? Or are they weakened because the surprise attack really did take them out?
Obviously, they are weakened. And all these attacks, daily attacks, the regime does not bother to even report them because they have no way or no ability to respond to them. The only thing regime has is propaganda. I mean, they have nothing but propaganda right now to respond.
And is the feeling on the ground that this is propaganda, is that being felt by the public? Or do you think that the propaganda is perhaps even working?
Well, again, there are 2 groups of people. One group, they say that we have no plan for peace, so let's commit us to war. The other, they say we would be destroyed by continuing this war. We have no way we could win or sustain or survive this war, so let's revert back somehow to the diplomatic phase. So there is that tension, that power struggle, that 2 groups within the regime right now fighting for those 2 goals, different goals.
Babak, Emamian, thank you so much for chatting to us today. Appreciate it. A reminder of our top stories once again. Trump issues a warning to Russia, 100% secondary tariffs in 50 days if no Ukraine deal is reached. Plus, a possible breakthrough in the Gaza ceasefire talks as President Trump voices his hope for a deal within days, but sources have accused Benjamin Netanyahu of stalling the process. And the Iranian president was injured during an Israeli strike last month targeting secret underground facilities in Tehran. That's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. Counterparts with Melinda Nusafora is coming up next, and we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye.